What?
Good morning again, everybody, and Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, yeah. Happy Mother's Day.
Thanks.
That's why there is such a... We are a reduced number today. I suspect there's a lot of people out celebrating Mother's Day or taking their mothers out or being taken out by their kids or spouses or whatever. So maybe one year we'll figure out how to do that and we'll have a big hat day here on Mother's Day.
Big hat?
Big hats, you know, big church hats.
Yeah.
Big colourful flower church hats, yes. That's
That
the
would,
thing.
that would be nice.
It would be really lovely, but instead we've got a board meeting.
C'est la vie.
I just had another funny one. We were doing the chat. Chad, would you mind switching all the lights on for us? Thank you. I just had a funny one. We were chanting away, and this little thing popped up across the top said, "We think you might have changed your language." I guess that means I'm trying to pronounce Pali terms, not like an Englishman.
Yeah.
So it means I'm not chanting them like an Englishman. I hope I'm chanting them somewhat appropriately, but something's changing. Anyway. All right. Today, the title, I've done my usual thing, my occasional thing, and I actually came up with a title, which some of you may have seen because I posted it maybe last night, I think. The Grand Illusion. The Grand Illusion. It's a title I stole from a wonderful book by Susan Blackmore, which Natalie pointed me out. It's a really wonderful little book.
You got it already?
Oh yeah, I finished it.
Oh, yeah, you can finish in a day.
It's a wonderful little book.
Yeah.
It's an introduction to consciousness, is what it's called. And she's actually a Zen practitioner, but she's also a former academic and theorist about consciousness. It's a really lovely little book. Anyway, I'm not going to follow her use of the title quite, but it's related. And the title also resonates with one of my favorite albums from my youth, which was The Grand Hotel by Procol Harum, one of those great British prog rock bands. Anyway. So the Grand Illusion. So we'll get to the Grand Illusion, but let's just set the stage for illusion for a minute, because we live in a world of illusion. We really do. Beth and I, when we got home from our evening out last night, we flipped on the TV and we watched one of our favourite shows, Elementary, which neither here nor there. But the whole TV thing, it's just an illusion, and it's an illusion on top of an illusion. You've got this screen in front of you, and you just drop into believing you've got a play on for them. You don't. You've got a bunch of pixels wandering around, and the screen refreshes about 50 times a minute. And it's a linear refresh, it's not screen refresh, this is linear refresh about 50 times a minute. But we fall into the illusion that there is live action right there in front of us. And we fall into the illusion, in this particular case, it was clearly a story, it's absolute fiction. But we fall into the illusion of the story, and we start identifying with the characters in the story. These are all illusions, we fall into this all the time. And we do so willingly. That we just drop ourselves into this, and this becomes part of our everyday life. Beth and I are going to go to see a Shakespeare play tonight. Same thing. We go into this room, and it's on the door it says theatre, right? It says, "This is a house of illusion, theatre." And we just go straight into this, accepting that there are people who are intentionally taking on roles, playing something else, and the whole thing is just a fabrication. I should have started really with the more obvious illusions, which are magicians. Houdini, great escape artist. The illusion is he had to escape. The reality is, that straitjacket, it was loose enough that he didn't have to worry about much of anything, right? All these tricks, they're tricks. But we love it. We love being fooled. And we want to try and find out how we've been fooled. And there's something that takes the mystery away when we know how we've been fooled. But on the other hand, there's something that allows us to go deeper. My favorite illusion, though, and I didn't bring my wallet, and my wallet's next door, but at this point I should just bring out a dollar bill and say, what's this? Money. What an illusion. Crazy. And we take it as so real. The dollar bill, it's made of cloth. It's made of some complex stuff, and the formula is secret and all the rest of it. But if I took one of those to the UK, yeah, I'm going to go there in a minute, Richard. If I go to the UK, nobody knows what it is, and if I had to try to pay for something with it, they'd laugh at me. I grew up, in my teens, we used to go on vacation, holidays we called it, to France, and we'd change all our money to francs, French francs, and then we'd drive across the border to Germany, and we'd change our francs into Deutschmarks. Neither of those exist anymore. If you showed up in France or Germany and you tried to use those currencies, you'd be laughed at. What are you trying to do, Grandpa? We've been using the euro since the 1970s. Money is just a great illusion, and we take it so seriously. And Richard just did, went to the next stage. He pulled out his credit card. People don't even carry money around now. And yet it is so important to us. The last couple of nights we had solar flares, and I didn't see them. Well, it was a solar flare that gave rise because of the magnetic, the elevated magnetic field created wonderful illusions in our atmosphere. Had those flares been even bigger, they would have brought down power grids. They would ultimately, if even big enough, would have wiped out all of our financial systems, which are all ones and zeros held on electric boxes. It would have just gone, poof. Because the backups wouldn't have worked either. It had just been wiped. Money is just an amazing illusion. And we take it so seriously. Inflation, hyperinflation. If you have hyperinflation, many countries around the world within all of our lifetimes have had hyperinflation. A lot of Latin American countries have had hyperinflation. A lot of African countries have had hyperinflation. It's just wiped out all of people's money. All the stuff they thought meant something doesn't mean anything. It's just an illusion. The grand illusion, of course, is this. That's what I'm going to get to talk. That's what I want to talk about mostly. But this is the grand illusion. But it is an illusion in the same way that all of those other things are illusions. There's something there. Money has utility. We use it to exchange things. The play has value, and it's fun. It's useful. There are lessons in there. We can have conversations around it. We gather socially around it. There's something there. It's just not what we think it is. So there's something here. It's just not what I think it is. The illusion is there is a thing called Gareth. But if we look closely, it's not true. That lovely little book, she pulls together a body of science. Susan Blackwell pulls together a body of science and knowledge that has been emerging over many decades now. Most of this is, there's not new knowledge in there. There's not much new knowledge in there. She puts it together in a very lovely way. But this has been emerging for a long while and is now settled knowledge. This doesn't work the way we think it works. Just flat out doesn't. And I mean, we have this perception of continuous consciousness. It's not. It jumps around all over the place. We have the perception that we experience time linearly. We don't. What's going on right now in this exchange is a really, well, it's not really an exchange at this point. It will be in a minute, but it's a one-way projection at this point. But what's happening here is a really good example, language. If you think about the sentence structure, you have noun, verb, noun, you have all sorts of conditional phrases following and preceding. We don't think about how to structure that, how to put it all back together. We don't say, hang on, let me hold this, okay, now let me put this back together, and now it almost makes sense. We just, on the fly, put this together, and we think we're understanding what's being said in linear time. If you think about it logically, it's clearly not what's happening. It's clearly not what's happening. The brain is doing some stuff with what it hears, and then it's projecting back. Right? I mean, it's clearly deconstructing and creating an artificial perspective of time for us. It does this all the time. Other well-known illusions, you've got the blind spot in your eye, right? You can play all sorts of tricks with the blind spot where the nerves all go back into the brain. And there's a spot which does not have photoreceptors. And you can play tricks, you block one eye and you can move things around and you can actually land something over the blind spot so you can't see it. But we don't experience that in everyday life because the brain fills in the gaps. We actually don't see or hear or touch very much at all, most of what we sense is actually the brain filling in gaps, because it's got this very limited information capture that actually, it's got massive information capture, but what it feeds through, what the system feeds through to the brain is very limited. So most of what we experience is actually coming from filling in gaps, both spatially and temporally. So this is great. So what do we do about this? Well, that's what our practice is about. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, sat still for a very long time, and he spent a lot of energy and effort going in and investigating. And his experience, without any of this scientific knowledge, without any experiments and sophisticated electrodes on brains and timekeeping devices, and without any of that, from his own internal exploration, the Buddha recognized that our consciousness isn't linear, that it isn't unified, that it's very fragmented. There is nowhere where it all comes together to form a me. There's touch consciousness. There's touch, there's subject, object of touch, and there's touch consciousness. And that's like an isolated thing. And the same with eye, and the same with ear. These are all kind of autonomous things that happen, and they talk to each other, but they don't come together in some grand central place that says, this is a me, this is where it all comes together as an I. And there are multiple different, the eye is not even a linear system, we've got cones and rods, and we've got peripheral vision, which is about motion, not objects, and then there are different pathways that deal with things differently. So vision is not, even that is not a coherent single thing. The Buddha sat and experienced this directly. Slow down, pay attention, and experience this directly. So it doesn't stay as head knowledge. It moves down and it becomes directly felt, directly experienced. This is not me. There is no me here. Four Noble Truths, Noble Eightfold Path, but a practical way to land the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path is just the three marks of existence. Anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Anicca, usually translated as impermanence, but it's actually a fairly sophisticated and subtle practice, because it's not just, this is impermanent, it will be broken. If I look at it closely, if I really know it, then it's a flaking off and dust's landing, and it's impermanent. It's more than that. And it's also best to direct inwardly rather than outwardly. So more interesting than that is my experience of this. What is going on with my experience of this? So it is impermanent, yes. Yes. And it is inconstant. Which is, it's not steady. It's not just it's impermanent as it's going to fade, it's going to change. It's not steady. It's not constant. It's also not continuous. That's another valence of this word, anicca, that we translate as impermanent. It's not continuous. I just looked away and it moved out of my mind, and I'm now over here, and now I've come back to it. There's no continuity here. And if we slow down and we pay attention to what's going on here, we can directly experience with everything that has an end to it, a Gareth end to it. There's all these things which have a Gareth end, and a Richard, or a Solomon, or a Winnie end, or a cup end. It doesn't have to be another person. But there's all these elements of consciousness. If we slow down and really pay attention, we can directly notice, we can directly know this anicca valence of all of them, this very subtle, very simple and yet very subtle impermanence, inconstant, not continuous. And as we start realizing that about everything that comes here, what happens is the sense of self that is assembled out of all of these bits, if all the bits start falling apart, there's no way of assembling the sense of self out of this. So this vestige of self, of identity, starts to crumble. So dukkha, usually translated as suffering, it's unreliable. It's we'll stick with suffering. It causes us this discomfort, this dis-ease, when we try to hold on to things. And if we recognize their nature, we start to recognize there is nothing to hold on to, and we start moving into the futility of holding on to anything. And the very effort of holding on to things starts to fade away once we start really seeing that there's nothing there to hold on to. That we start really seeing the truth of anicca, then this desire to hold on to things starts fading, because we just start intuiting there isn't anything to hold on to. And this whole sense of atta, anatta, this whole sense of self falls into anatta. And what Buddha actually said there was, once we recognize the truth of anicca and the truth of dukkha, then we say of everything, and it's everything in here, he's not looking at the world. Well, he's looking at the world, but the world, as he describes it, is what's happening here. Our world is precisely what's happening here. That's the only world we can ever have. By definition, we can't know anything that doesn't land here. So he says, of the world, there is nothing of which I can say, this is mine. How can I have something that dissolves like incense smoke in my hands? There's nothing here of which I can say, this is mine. There's nothing here of which I can say, this is me. Because there's no thing that holds together. How can there be anything I call a me? There's nothing of which I can say, this is myself. So this becomes an exercise in just completely, by slowing down and seeing clearly, we find ourselves letting go of things. And in that letting go comes freedom. Nirvana is the word that's used, and it's usually translated as extinguishing, as in extinguishing a flame. But I've used this, I've used this a lot. Culturally, at the time, the flame wasn't extinguished, the fire was released. It's released, it's liberation. So once we move through these truths, what happens is freedom. There's nothing to land. There's nothing that sticks. It's just freedom, it's totally liberating. There are some traps along the ways, and there are some ways of slipping off and falling into nihilism. But if this path is followed properly, then what happens with that liberation is not nihilism. What happens is profound compassion. Because there's a recognition of all these other, all these other beings that really aren't beings. In the same way that I'm not a being, nobody else is a being, and yet they think they are. There's so much suffering arises as a result of this. And it comes here when I experience somebody who cuts me off, or who does something I don't like, who doesn't understand what I need, and they act in their selfish ways. But if I can really recognize the truth of anicca, dukkha, anatta, right here, right now, then there's no possibility of anything other than understanding that that is coming, that behavior that's landing. It doesn't land, and I recognize it's coming from ignorance, it's coming from a lack of understanding, and that it's causing dukkha. How can that give rise to anything other than compassion, if it's really seen? There's a profound mystery here, because we dissolve all of this, and yet there is still this experience of freedom. Who's the experiencer? There's no experiencer. But there is liberation and there is freedom. The Buddha in the Pali Canon, he intentionally talked about the path. This is Gareth's theory now. He intentionally talked about the path, and he described to people how this had worked for him in ways that he said, I think if you try this, you might find it works for you. Give it a go. He didn't talk about what nirvana looked like, what it felt like. Number one, because you can't. And number two, there is actually no unitary experience of that. It's not just you can't. To try to be asked to describe it actually doesn't compute. Tathagata is thus come, thus gone. And in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha recharacterizes that. He says, call me Tathagata really misses the point. It's actually, there is nowhere to come from and nowhere to go to. But there is still the going in a strange kind of way, the going and the coming. So the description doesn't compute. So Buddha did not talk about that. It does slip in there. I think it's in there precisely twice. And one is a sutra that many of you have heard me use before, which I really like, which is consciousness that does not land. The light coming through the window, where does it land? On the far wall. If there's no wall, where does it land? On the ground. If there's no ground, on the water. If there's no water, where does it land? It does not land. This is one of the ways that the Buddha in the Pali Canon tried to describe what this feeling of liberation, what this liberation is actually like. It shows up just a couple of times, but he really didn't talk about it very much, and it was, I think, very intentional not to talk about it, because he did not want us to get stuck on what this is like, because when it happens, you know it. What he wanted us to do was focus entirely on the path to get there. On practicing, recognizing incremental freedom along the way, and practicing up to find our liberation. So, so when liberated, what happens? Well, yeah, as I say, if done wrong, you can get lost. But if done right, there's this profound compassion. So consciousness, as in what does show up here, this fragmented, non-continuous, non-linear, disjointed set of bits, it's useful. It's just flat out useful. This is the Bodhisattva, returns and assembles in order to help free beings. It's just useful. It's also extraordinarily beautiful. These flowers which Coco brought in yesterday, just beautiful flowers. They are so beautiful when we talk about them as flowers, and they are so much more beautiful when seen non-dually as the entire universe, which even that's kind of a dualistic thing, they set up universe in opposition to non-universe. But seen from that place, you go around, in the beginning a mountain is a mountain and a river is a river, then they're not, and then you come back around and they're a mountain and a river again. Only they're not the same mountain and the same river. I'm talking about seeing the flowers as not the same flowers. After liberation, they're not the same flowers, and they are so much more beautiful than they ever were before. And the other thing is, it's fun! This is, in the Sanatana Dharma, in Hinduism, the story of creation. This is Shiva and Shakti playing, consorting. And there's this lila, the game of creation. It's seen as a game. It's talked about it as a game. It's just fun. It's beautiful and it's fun. So this path isn't to escape the world. It's to escape the wheel of suffering, is to escape samsara, but it's not to escape the world, it's to see the world as it really is, which is far more beautiful and far more fun than we could ever imagine. So those are some words of encouragement to stick with your practice and keep there on the cushion, investigating all these phenomena, seeing through all these phenomena, seeing, and first of all, seeing anicca. That's what I have for you, folks. Thoughts, questions, comments? Natalie?
I want to say hi to Beth, Christina, Pat, Anand. Hi, everybody.
The illusion of people on the TV screen.
Yeah. These were
You're on
recorded.
mute there.
They were recorded hours ago, right?
That's right.
I just wanted to say I'm not real.
What's the third one? There's the impermanence, then there's dukkha. What's the third?
Non-self. So it's anicca, which is this
Anicca,
impermanence, inconstancy, etc. Dukkha, anatta, not
Anatta.
self.
Not self, okay.
Nothing of which I can say, this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am.
Now, this is a unique opportunity to see two Garretts. Can you do me a favor and pin Garrett so he's bigger on the screen?
He can't, I can. I should have done
Oh,
earlier.
you can. Can you do that?
I'll do it just for a moment. But then
Just
I'm
for a
gonna do
moment.
it.
Just for a moment. I want to see two Garretts of the same size, if possible.
There we
Then
go.
compare those two.
Ah, godlike.
No, the big one. It's not big. Never mind. I see a little Garrett and a big Garrett, right?
Where's the big carrot?
Well, the big
Top
Garrett
left.
is sitting in front of me, and the
Where's
little
the big
Garrett
Garrett?
is on the screen, right?
And then if I do this,
If you double click it, it's going to be two big Garretts. It's not coming big.
oh, I see what you mean. It would be on here. It would happen if you looked at this monitor. That's
Okay.
right.
No,
So-
do the one where you're all covered with light. You're all like white and glowing. I don't know.
I
I've
saw
tried
that.
before.
We're not going to play that game, Rosemary.
So
I saw
what I-
that.
Oh,
too.
you did it. It was one of the settings.
So what I want to say is both of those images, there's no essential difference. There are two images on my retina, and then my mind creates Gareth, right? So there's really no difference between that one and that one, as far as my perception goes.
I'm going to challenge you on that. That may be as far as your believed perception goes, but actually at a much deeper level, your eyes are registering screen by screen what's going on over here. And that is not rising up to the conscious level. Your eyes are registering 2 dimensions here, because you've got 2 eyes looking at what's a 2-dimensional surface, and you've got 2 eyes looking here at something that's 3-dimensional. So there actually is a real substantive difference between
I
the
can
two.
cover one
There's
eye,
a,
but it's always-
well, you can fool around with it and get closer, but there's a time delay between the two. And so if you're engaging
There's
with
a
it,
time delay here too.
it's very different time. If you engage with that, the time
Well,
delay works
The
differently.
point is, this is clearly an illusion. But since I don't see essential difference between the two, that just makes me really see how this is an illusion
Yeah.
too. And so is this, and so is this, and it's all an illusion.
It's all an
Of course,
illusion.
what I'm looking at, and this is how I can see for myself. What I'm looking at is inside of my mind. What I'm hearing is inside of my mind. What I'm feeling is inside of my mind. And whatever I'm thinking about is also inside of my mind. And who is thinking about is also inside of my mind. It's all inside of my mind. And that's what I see as big illusion. And as a teenager, I read this word, Mahamaya, in Hinduism.
Mhm.
And I was already, as a teenager, I was doing some magician tricks. I'm very familiar with the concept of illusion. But I was curious, what is Mahamaya? What is Mahamaya? What is the big one, you know? And I think now I have a clue. Now, what are we talking about? That's the clue. What I think is real is actually inside of my mind, and that's the big illusion. Big illusion is thinking that it's real. That's the trick.
Actually, there's another one for you, which I'll just throw at you, and then we'll go to Rosemary. But the other one is, your mind is an illusion. Rosemary.
Well, there's illusion and there's illusion, because if you take illusion too literally as being nothing out there, or nothing, there's nothing you can see, there's nothing you can grasp, really. It will all go through your fingers. So there's nothing out there, but then And notwithstanding time too, because if there's nothing out there, it doesn't change in time. If there's something out there, it changes in time, and maybe that makes it an illusion or maybe not. But my bottom line question is, what does that do to ethics? So you can't take this illusion too literally, because then there's no ethical component in Buddhism, and there is an ethical component.
So there's a distinction. This is the trap that I was trying to describe, Rosemary. Obviously didn't do it very well, but the describing this reality as an illusion doesn't mean nihilism.
Right.
Does not mean there's nothing there. It's just it's not what we think it is. It's what we see is an illusion. And we can come to see things as it is what, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, which is nothing other than dependent co-arising. That's it, dependent co-arising, and then the unraveling of dependent co-arising. So we can actually, if we slow down enough, and we investigate enough, and we work at this hard enough, we can directly experience that. So we can see what this really is, and see the illusion, and find the whole thing beautiful and hilarious at the same time. So the mistake is, if a mistake is to land on the side of nihilism, which is to miss the important point. What this does for ethics, this is the point I was trying to get at about compassion. If I see there's nothing there, then what I see is I see that there are so many beings who have self-assembled out of ignorance because they don't understand, they haven't seen this clearly. And if I really understand and see this, that can give rise to nothing but profound compassion. Because there isn't a me here that's actually got a stake in the game. All there is a recognition of suffering. And so there's a desire to move into that suffering and work to alleviate that suffering. If anything, it amplifies ethical behavior rather than undermines it, if taken in that direction. Anand.
Thank you, Garrett. So the nirvana, or nothing lands there. That is the point where you're talking about, right? That makes that's when that is everything is an illusion. I think until you get to nirvana, you cannot really see that grand illusion. And you also mentioned it's a fun, right?
Yeah.
Like the prapancha is a fun, right? You don't need to run away from anything. Like, so that means that tells that you need to engage more than you need to engage less.
Yeah.
Just wanted to see, and that with that engagement, in spite of, the compassion is the natural state, but there is so much suffering, right, because of the ignorance. Everyone, there is a lot of ignorance, so there is a lot of suffering. I don't know if that is a fun or not. That is something. There is a element of it's not fun, but it is more. I don't know. It's kind of a sad situation, but it is. I think you need to get equanimity into that thing.
Yeah, equanimity is important. Yes, thank you. So a couple of thoughts on what you just said, Anand. Nirvana is the full release, like done, let go of everything. And at that point, which I'm convinced that has happened, right? But it's rare. It's rare. But the good news is that it is very common, and a lot more common than we like to think. It is very common to have openings, and many of us, most of us, at different times in our lives have had things where the separation between self and other just drops away. Examples you've heard me use before are being in the room when a baby's born, standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon. One that came up recently was full solar eclipse. People who can drop into just this place, total awe, and self drops away. So these experiences, they do show up, and they allow us to touch that place. And one of the Buddhist practices is sati, which is usually translated as mindfulness, but it really has a valence of remembering what's skillful, remembering what's not. And it is skillful to try not to hold on to, because we can't hold on to them, we can't recapture them, but to remember these moments where the bottom dropped out, where the self disappeared. To remember, and if we can, remember the kind of ways that we entered that. Because if we create, we can't make ourselves wake up, but as Shunryu Suzuki can't talk. As Shunryu Suzuki said, we can make ourselves accident prone. If we think about the things that led to this, we can recreate those environments. So for example, where is he? Forest bathing. You're supposed to look at me at this point.
Where is he?
Forest bathing.
I'm not you.
That's right.
I'm an illusion.
It works, but and the Buddha really recommended going outdoors and meditating in a forest. The Thai forest tradition is forest-based, and there's a reason for that, because that environment is conducive to these kind of openings. You settle down and you sit in those environments, you're more likely for these awakenings, these openings to happen. So remember what's skillful and practice with that. And the boundary between so beauty I won't I'll recap and refresh that, but I do maintain it's beautiful. Seeing beings in their tragedy is in a mysterious way beautiful, because it is just life. It is just life lived to its full. It's tragic, but it's also beautiful, and it's being experienced so much more richly and so much more deeply. And fun, you're right. That's a word that has an edge that's probably not appropriate to that. Natalie.
We can think of the illusion not so much of as illusion in general, but as controlled illusion. And what that means is that the nervous system, and primarily the brain, is trapped in a black box, and it doesn't really have any access to reality other than the signals that come from the senses. And so the brain is sitting in this black box and has to interpret what these signals mean. So basically it has to predict what is causing these signals out there so that the organism has a chance to survive. And this is not an arbitrary prediction, it's a prediction that is also coupled with error minimization, which means that when we have, it's true that we have the blind spot, but what the brain fills into the blind spot is not an arbitrary thing. It's something that really is consistent with the surrounding environment. And so when the brain makes a prediction about something out there or in the rest of the organism, and this prediction is wrong, there is the error message kicks in, and so the brain tries to change the prediction. So it is an illusion, but it's always a controlled illusion based on the outside reality and also on the homeostasis of the organism. So I think this is a really important thing that can keep us away from thinking that we are inventing the world and the world doesn't exist except in our solipsistic mind. And if we close our eyes, everything is going to die, and we open it and we create it. So I think that staying away from that is really thinking about how we need to really, that illusion that the brain creates has to respond to something that actually could hurt or help. It's not just arbitrary.
It's not just arbitrary and agreed, but it is an illusion. And I'm going to stretch on that because I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think there's an and to what you're saying, which is consciousness is not the mind. I am not the mind. It's the same thing I said to Goran. I am not my mind. My mind is also an illusion. So whatever the system is doing is interesting, but I don't have to identify with it. Feeling there's an identity of self with the system is an error. It's just a mistake. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. It doesn't have to happen. And what's happening, so that the world that is created here, I actually have no idea really what's going on out there. I have the filtered information that this system has put together. But what's going on out there is vastly, vastly, vastly more complicated than this could ever capture or process or present. And it's presented in such a fragmented way. And the theories of consciousness, scientific theories of consciousness, differ from the Buddhist approach to consciousness in that the scientific theories of consciousness are dominantly founded on materialism. Now, even those that say they're not materialistic still take matter as presiding and de facto. But Buddhism would suggest that matter and consciousness co-arise. That there can't be stuff unless there is consciousness. And I don't have unitary consciousness. This world is a world that's created collaboratively by gazillions of minds, right? So I can't unilaterally make decisions about this, but there is a mind that is, there's a, like if you look at a bee colony, you've got the colony, and then you've got the individual bees, and then you've got the individual sense organs in the individual bees, and you've got the individual atoms in it. So you've got these, like this cascading or this nested view of consciousness. There is, we just have such a limited view, And to think we can come up with dispositive answers from within that limited view is itself an illusion. So there's a letting go, even of thinking we can find an answer that's absolutely fundamental to finding freedom. Goran.
Yeah, what Natalie was talking about brain and
then on
psychology. I like to understand that level of understanding. So what I learned recently is fascinating. Like, okay, this is like a model of reality, right? But I'm not actually, as I thought, creating it from my perceptions. Nope. It's created from my perceptions, but then it's only updated with my perceptions.
That's right.
And there's this error correction thing. Like when I'm climbing the stairs, I'm not looking at the stairs, judging how tall they are. It's already in the model. And it only becomes relevant if it's different, then I trip, right?
Yeah.
So I'm actually perceiving a lot less than I think. 99% of what I experience is already in my brain as a model.
That's
And
right.
only the corrections are coming in through my senses. Because the bandwidth is much smaller, I couldn't be able to create by 50 times a second the whole thing. It's quite fascinating.
It's extraordinary, and I'm with you. I think understanding, and it can be really useful to understand the science of this, because it just takes you down a path of incrementally deconstructing. Let me go to Anand and then really quickly, Richard, before we finish. Anand?
Yep. Thank you, Gareth. This conversation made me think there is no difference between illusion and views, right? So the view is same as illusion is there. I just wanted to say.
Yeah. So a view is what comes when we start taking our illusion seriously. Wisdom comes when we recognize the illusion is illusion. Richard?
Two things. One is that what you just said was that I read this piece lately that was a black writer wrote, the problem with racists is that they can't see who I really am.
Yep.
Right? And that's true about a lot of things.
Yep.
But if you can let go of your racism and that's letting go of your view and see things as they really are. And that's a good example of one. What I want to bring up though is the skandhas, because we talked about this, but skandhas play an important role. So for example, I tell the story about being in the garage with my wife, right? And we got this messy garage, we're trying to clean it up, and I want to throw stuff out, and she wants to sell it, right? So we have this frustrating argument. Not we're having an argument, but we're there, in this kind of tense moment, and she says something to me, and I don't recall what it was, but how I interpreted it was really important. It was like I heard what she said, was my sense reaction. I had a perception which I felt, which was pleasant or unpleasant. In this case, it was unpleasant, right? And that triggered a mental formation, which was, this hurts. Why'd she say this to me? What is it? I'm upset now, right? And then my consciousness was, I'm about to react. And at that moment, I had slowed this down. I saw the process. My consciousness was about to go, rah!
Yep.
And I said, no, wait a minute, she's my wife, she loves me. And it all just went away. And that is part of how Buddhists, that's what happens all the time with us. And it brings up our views, it starts with a sense reaction, moves to perception, moves to mental formation, moves to consciousness and our action.
And the teachings give us so many tools, and the skandhas are a great tool, and that's a good example of using them.
And also it reveals the illusion.
Yeah, and so the teachings give us all these tools that allow us to when we slow down, to deconstruct and see the illusion.
And that's from
That's a great
practice.
example.
And that's from practice. And
Let's-
thank you for your talk.
Thank you, Richard. And it's all practice. So we've got to actually do the work. We are right at time, so I've run a little long here. Let it run a little long. Let us save some beings and then finish with the announcements. So if you would go to the last page of the card. Beings are numberless, I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless, I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow